Good evening and welcome to the series on the Gospel of Matthew. We're going to look at the Gospel of Matthew, just a few of the texts from the 28 chapters, and we're going to have two companions on the journey. We're going to look at some photographs by the Brazilian photographer Sebastiano Salgado, and we're going to look at one poet, English-born American poet, Denise Levertov. In looking at the structure and the themes and the underlying theology of Matthew, I'm going to be following Daniel Harrington's book, The Gospel of Matthew. It was published in 2007 and is available on Amazon. It's £20 new, £10 used. To understand Matthew, we need to understand the Jewish context that the Gospel was written in, that Matthew was in a largely Jewish Christian community, and Matthew uses quite a lot of Jewish rhetoric and themes that we sometimes find difficult to follow. Obviously, the Gospel is written after the fall of the Temple in Jerusalem in AD 70, and there is a conflict among Jews about the destruction of that temple and the continuation of Judaism. We want to say a word or two about the text and the language. The Gospel itself probably was written in the late 2nd or 3rd century, written in good Greek and probably not written in Hebrew. The composition and the sources of the Gospel are that there are 5 large blocks of text, and at the beginning there is the infancy narrative, and at the end of the Gospel the Passion and the Resurrection. So at the beginning of the Gospel we've got the where and the why of Jesus' ministry, and the beginning of Jesus' active ministry. And our text this week is going to be from chapter 4. We're going to look at the call of the disciples by the Sea of Galilee. Next week we're going to look at the Sermon on the Mount in chapter 5. The third week we're going to look at one of the parables of the kingdom, the seed and the sower, in chapter 13. In week 4 we're going to look at the corporal works of mercy in chapter 25, and our final week we'll look at the end of Matthew's Gospel, chapter 28, the missionary charge. The interesting thing about the Gospel is that in the first chapter we are told that the birth of the Messiah at Bethlehem will be the Emmanuel, the God who is with us. And in chapter 28, in the missionary charge, again we are told that the disciples will take with them the God who is with us, the God who will be with us to the end of the ages. So probably this Gospel was written about the year 85 or 90, and it probably was written anonymously. It has then been ascribed to Matthew, and Matthew himself says in chapter 13, verse 52, "Every scribe who has become a disciple of the kingdom of heaven is like a householder who brings out of his treasury new things and old things." So Matthew's Gospel is keen to celebrate the continuity of the Jewish roots, but to show the uniqueness of Christ's mission and to help us to understand better the struggles that the early Christian community had. However, the titles that are used for Christ are very Jewish, the principal themes being the kingdom of heaven, righteousness, perfection, the Son of David, Son of Man, and Son of God. The location of the Gospel probably was written in Syria or Palestine. And so in concluding these remarks, I just want to underline 6 major theological themes that come through. I've already alluded to the destruction of the temple in AD 70 and the Jewish notion of fulfillment. So that is an underlying theme in the Gospel. The second is the importance of the Torah. The Torah gained more importance after the destruction of the temple. Matthew presents Jesus as the authentic interpreter of the Torah. After the Sermon on the Mount, he says, I have come not to destroy, but to fulfill the law and the prophets, in chapter 5, verse 15. The third important thing is the titles that the Gospel give. Messiah, Son of David, Son of God, Servant of God, Shepherd, Son of Man. And Matthew presents Jeremiah as the model for Jesus, the one who is suffering and who is prophetic. The fourth major theme in the Gospel is the kingdom of God. It's central to Jesus' preaching in the Gospel, and it tells us that God's future display of power and judgment is the establishment of his rule over all creation. We know from the teaching of Vatican II, our fifth theme, the people of God. For Matthew, the followers of Jesus constitute that people of God, and that is for Jews and the inclusion of non-Jews as well. And we see that in the parable of the vineyard in chapter 23. Finally, the disciples of Jesus serve as a model for Matthew's Christians. The disciples are to share in the power of the risen Christ, and they are to transmit the teaching of the earthly Jesus. Many different people have poets that they like. In this course of 5 reflections, I'm just going to share with you one poet. Denise Levertov is a very interesting lady because she was born of a Welsh mother who was into chapel worship, and a Hasidic Jewish father who eventually became an Anglican clergyman. She was born in Essex but emigrated to America, and over the span of almost 60 years, her poetry touches on a whole variety of issues: the beauty of creation, the importance of relationship, the scourge of war in the world. So each week we will use one of her poems to try and broaden our vocabulary and to help us to look at the texts of the Gospel of Matthew in a new way. The poem that we're going to look at this week is called For Those Whom the Gods Love Less. And one of the interesting things about this poem is that it takes up St. Ignatius's idea that there is a real value in repetition. There are new fruits to be gained in our spiritual life. So let's listen to the words of Levertov. When you discover that your new work travels the ground you have traversed decades ago, you wonder, panicked, have I outlived my vocation, said already all that was mine to say? There's a remedy, only one, for the paralysis seizing your throat to mute you, numbing your hands, remembering great ones, remembering Cézanne, doggedly sur le motif, his mountain. A tireless noonday angel, he grappled like Jacob, demanding reluctant blessing. Or remembering James rehearsing over and over again his theme, the loss of innocence and the attainment, note by separate note, sounding its tune, until by gradation a chord resounds of sombre understanding. Each life in art goes forth to meet dragons that rise from their bloody scales in cyclic rhythm. No one forget, no one forget. It's not only the passion for getting it right, although it's that too. It's the way that radiant epiphanies recur and recur, consuming, pristine, unrecognized, until remembrance dismisses you. And then, look, some inflection of light, some wing of shadow is other unvoiced. you can, you must proceed. For me, the two key words there are radiant epiphanies. How in our spiritual life do we experience these radiant epiphanies, these invitations into the light of the Lord? Take a moment and reflect on that. I'm going to offer each week a reflection on photographs taken by Sebastiano Salgado. He started life as an economist. He trained in Brazil and moved to Paris, and he got a job working for the Coffee Foundation, and he was sent to Rwanda to help those people diversify their crop. And he was very successful in encouraging coffee growers to begin to plant tea. At the same time, his wife was studying architecture in Paris, and he found that when he went on these trips as an economist, he took more and more photographs. And so he took the momentous decision to become a professional photographer. And so over the last 60 years, he has travelled the world and has, in many different parts of the world, covered some of the main events of the last 3 decades. He was instrumental in sharing with the world the genocide in Rwanda. In the country that he had worked as an economist, he went back and he brought the photographs to the world's attention of the atrocities that were happening in that country. Over time, he has studied famine, disease, migration of people, and we will have an opportunity to view some of his photographs. After 20 years of being involved in that, he felt he needed some new energy and some revitalization. So one of the projects he undertook was the Genesis Project, and he did 32 reports from all over the world of places, of people, of animals, and of landscape that still remain untouched by nature. We're going to look at some of those pictures this week. We're going to look at the South Sandwich Islands, which is a colony of 150,000 pairs of penguins. We're going to look at some of the work of people in Brazil who fish, and we're also going to look at the beauty of the elephant in Zambia. Stop the tape now and reflect on Matthew 4:12 to 25. Use these final 3 pictures to reflect on the beauty of creation, the diversity of culture, and the real importance of love. Love for ourselves, for our neighbour, and for the wider world.